Welcome to the Alberta Prosperity Project Podcast. If you're ready to listen, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Thursday, September 1st, 2022. Welcome to episode 16 of the Alberta Prosperity Project Podcast. I'm your host, Hunter today, joined today with Tanner, who has the hat again and is back in Lloyd. Tanner, how are you?
Not so bad. You're right. I have the hat. I am back in Lloyd. Now, the reason I'm wearing the hat, I should be honest, is because though I think it's fashionable, and indeed I do think it's fashionable, I've often heard it debated that I actually, or this hat more accurately, resembles something that a farmer would wear in the early 20th century, apparently to keep the sun off his face. So in solidarity with the farmers that are now combining, like mad, and super bees are hauling to the elevator and the dust is flying, it's great, I figured I would wear the hat today as a token, as a sign of thankfulness for all the farmers that are just giving her. So hopefully we're praying for a good crop, well, the crops look great, at least here. I know some guys tragically got hailed out, but here the crops look nice and we're praying for a good harvest. So
Yeah, no, it's nice that you brought up the 20s farmer that people often tell you it reminds you of that. I'd agree with them for sure. I mean, when you have nothing better to wear, when you are hard times with the farmers in the 20s and 30s, that was likely all that they had. So I guess, if that's how we stand in solidarity, that's how we do it. But obviously for the listeners that will all know by now, it is September already. Crazy to say that. The year, I would say, has flown by. And with that, I mean, long weekend obviously is coming up. Now this weekend, I'll be going down actually to southern Saskatchewan to first go see my uncle and aunt, and then we'll be going a bit more central Saskatchewan to see the wife's family also there, the grandparents and that kind of thing. So that should be a lot of fun. But yeah, hang out on the farm. I might, have to do some joy rides on the swather or the combine. We'll see what works out, what doesn't work out. Who knows?
Will you be driving the combine?
Well,
That's
we'll be driving it. I can't guarantee that nothing will come back in one piece, but I will. We'll make something work. We'll make her go.
Not bad.
So yeah, it should be
good on you. We'll be praying for it. When I was on the farm, I only ever wanted to drive the Super B. I never really had a desire to drive the combine because of my luck, and certainly with your luck. I can, I don't prophesy. I prophesy after the event has already occurred.
Yeah.
But you're going to pick up a stone or a skunk. I can guarantee it. You're putting the biggest rock that God has ever put on the earth through the feeder house, right through the combine. I can see it right now.
Adds a nice crunch to the barley as people are having some of that. So you can't complain.
A little bit of, nutrients in the barley.
Absolutely. But no, obviously, like you mentioned, we are hoping for a great harvest. We obviously are very thankful for farmers here at the Alberta Prosperity Project and wishing them all a great harvest and a great year and success to come. But with that said, I mean, a little bit different topic than harvest for this podcast today. We can bring it up maybe in some way if it comes up throughout the podcast, but that is going to be on the dangers of modern day journalism and how journalism has kind of developed over, well, since its inception, I guess you could say. But I guess just to begin with, maybe to get a baseline for everyone so that we're all on the same page, do you maybe want to touch just a little bit on what the actual purpose of journalism is?
Sure. Yeah. The reason we're doing journalism today is just because with all of the debates, the leadership debates and all that's happening in the political realm at present, right? Journalists are in a frenzy and the media is working as hard as it can to advance its aims, right? So why not talk about this issue that's becoming increasingly vogue with Canadians who are increasingly rightfully dissatisfied with the service that our media is providing us. I use service with air quotes, right? Like that they're providing us. So as far as I'm concerned, the proper job of journalism is simply to accurately describe reality as it actually is, right? The proper journalist has an extremely important position, right? It's a heavy burden. He occupies this position in society of at once observing an event that's important and relevant, and then carefully and truthfully conveying the details of that event to individuals like you and I in order that we might compose an accurate picture of reality, right? So what's a good example? Well, you can use the protest. I remember I think you were there too, right? Yeah, you were. Remember we went to the protest in Edmonton.
Yeah.
What was it, back in February, right?
Yeah, it was cold.
Yeah, back in February. It was cold, but it was fun. Against the lockdowns and stuff. Thousands of people were there, right? Huge protest at the legislature, massive. And there were semis. This was during, the convoy and, it was great. It was awesome. Might have been even March. Anyways, doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter. Doesn't matter. Can't remember when that was.
Yeah.
The point being, I heard crickets from the media, right? We heard
Mm-hmm.
nothing. Or when they took pictures of it, it was just of a sparse little group gathering in some corner, right? Some peculiar location. The reality was the place was full. There was a lot of people there. The energy was electric, and that is the description of that event properly conveyed. But it wasn't properly conveyed, right? It wasn't accurately conveyed. Instead, there was some different narrative that, it was a group of extremists or radicals, which is utter nonsense. We're not radical or extremist, right? That's total nonsense. And it was peaceful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the point being, if the journalist was doing his or her job, they would accurately convey reality as it actually is, right? Now, by doing so, they also display the public opinion. So if they go back to the protest, if they had truthfully stated that there were thousands of people attending this protest and had done so before and were going to do so the week after, and that the semis were rolling through the town like this, well, it was this massive convoy, it was excellent, right? Then you compose a public opinion on the matter, and you can say there are a lot of people who are upset with the federal government's laws or the provincial government's laws, whatever government's laws and restrictions and mandates, etc., right? But what they do now is, because they present so many narratives, false narratives, you confuse the public opinion, and nobody really knows what the position of society actually is. You have to go to Coffee Row now, which I enjoy doing, to get the news on the street, so to say. And then lastly, properly, media is supposed to be a first line, well, even just a major line of defense against tyrannical government. Suppose you have a politician trying to override the Constitution, okay? The media should be there investigating, asking questions, etc., and then writing or speaking to the general public. So-and-so politician is trying to override the Constitution. Then you and I, hearing a story and being informed, can go to Parliament Hill to protest, or who knows, to do it in order to stop that, trespass on what the politician has no power over. So that's the proper job of media.
Sure. Yeah, no, and you just did a very good job there, I think, of summarizing the true purpose of it. But I guess, obviously, it'd be kind of a boring podcast if we just said what the purpose was and said, okay, thank you, have a great day. See you next week. So maybe do you want to touch a little bit maybe now on what is actually happening within journalism today, especially within Canada and perhaps with the CBC, and just wherever you want to take that. What is happening right now and today?
Right. So journalism today, particularly with the CBC, is no longer journalism. Instead, it's public relations. That's not my quote. That's actually from Orwell, or I'm going to read it. Even though he's not a biblical prophet, as far as I'm concerned, whatever Orwell wrote seems to be coming true. He seems to be a pretty excellent prophet of the modern times, of what governments would descend into. So I'll just read this quote quick. He says, journalism is printing what someone else does not want printed. Everything else is public relations, right? So let's focus on the CBC, right? The CBC has become, or is become, the public relations department for government. They're literally funded by the federal government, right? Like, it's the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So there is not a hope that they can be impartial or objective in their matter, because their paychecks come from the individuals that they're supposed to be reporting on, right? So it just, it doesn't compute at all, right? So the issue is they become public relations. Now, you say, well, I guess that means that they tell us a whole lot. Not necessarily. It's the opposite, right? The true danger of being this public relations arm, of being this political arm, is not that the media tells us so much. Rather, it's that they tell us so little, right? The great danger of the media is that they have recognized that maybe at one time they were an organization of a minority meant to impart knowledge. Now they are an organization still composed of a minority, but it's becoming increasingly large as the bureaucracy inflates and expands, right? They're an organization that has now worked, or is working, to withhold information rather than impart it, right? Now, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is quite simple and quite clear, particularly with the government, right? With our elected officials, right? The new ruler has no worries about subverting the Constitution. Right. It used to be that if he was overriding the Constitution, or an individual, a journalist, could report on it. Right. If a politician was explicitly overriding law, it was clear, and the media would say, see what he's up to. He's overriding the Constitution. Or ideally, that's how it should work. Right. But now this modern ruler I call him the modern king, the modern prime minister, the modern MLA, whatever, what might have you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's more likely, right, that he'll just ignore it, the
Mm-hmm.
Constitution or the law. He'll just go behind its back. He'll just work behind the scenes in the quiet because he knows that his life is more private than yours is, and it's more private than mine is, right?
Right.
Because he or she pays the media, the CBC, if something isn't supposed to get out, it won't get out, right? If something isn't supposed to be investigated, well, then it won't be investigated, right? The fact that because the media is so massive and because it's, well, we know this mainstream media problem of being really attached to government, the ability for them to report on matters that are probably contentious for the government is exceedingly diminished. And so the politicians able to subvert around and what's the word, kind of maneuver around the public eye and instead work in the back room to get much more done than what we would actually like to see happen. And so that's really the problem is the media has simply become a public relations arm for the government, particularly the CBC, because again, they are part of the bureaucracy.
Right. Right. Yeah. And with that, I guess then the next and I think final segment that we'll do on this portion of the podcast is how exactly do we fight it? Like, what is the solution to this issue that we're facing in journalism? How do we get back to what it's meant to be and stray away from where we are today?
Right. So the first point is defund the CBC. That's like a major reason why we're promoting independence, because we're sick and tired of having the government literally pay the media, right? And have media officials, have journalists being paid by government. There is nothing objective about that whatsoever. And there's no way then to hold those officials to account, because we can never be entirely certain that the information's correct, because again, the media and the government, the media and the bureaucracy are one. And so it just completely annihilates their ability to be objective in any meaningful capacity. So you have to defund the CBC, right? And that might make some members of the media upset, but we know it's true. You have to do it. You have to. And again, if the fact of the matter is, if the programming is so excellent, if the news is so great, if the CBC is such a high quality organization, then it shouldn't matter whether they're funded by government or not. Profit is a signal of value. So if that media corporation is making profit, then it signals to them that indeed they are giving us something which we desire and want. If, on the other hand, absent of government, or more rather emancipated from government and their subsidies, if CBC goes bankrupt, right, then it's a signal that they are doing something wrong and we do not want their product. So to me, it's an even better test to make the market stronger, to make the media stronger, or to make, not strong, stronger is the wrong word, to make it more reliant and robust and allow us to more accurately choose. And the members of the CBC will have a more accurate description of whether or not we actually like their program. Right? So that's the first thing, defund the CBC. The second thing is to not buy the paper and not watch the news. C.S. Lewis has this excellent essay called After Priggery, What? Now, Priggery is just a man who is stuck up, snobbish, right? But basically the question he asks is this. He goes, we have bad journalists in Britain, and this is in the 40s, right? This isn't modern day, I know, but either way. He says, we have bad journalists. They lie, they're malicious, they love to stir up conflict just to create a story, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Lewis goes, how do we deal with them? Because we don't necessarily want to pass, I don't certainly, want to pass laws on free speech in order to protect free speech, right? I think that's exceedingly dangerous. And it gives the government a lot of control and a lot of power that I don't want to give them. They already have too much. So instead, says Lewis, why not try and fight this massive lying media using public opinion, using individual choice? He says, simply don't buy their paper. Don't associate with the reporter. Don't give him or her the time of day, right? Don't watch the news. And he says, you might be one person, true, and I might be one person, but together we're two. And I'm one and you're one, but together we're two. And then, your wife is three and the listener is four and another member of APP is five. And eventually that number begins to increase and expand of individuals not buying papers and not buying the news and not looking at, this massive mainstream media, which is often very untruthful, right? Like, when's the last time you watched the news?
Yeah, not in a
No,
while.
honestly,
I mean, I look on Twitter and that kind of thing for podcast ideas, and I will watch some nights just to see if there's something for the podcast. But it's usually not to get my factual information. You can usually see the bias and the leniency in that.
No, totally. Like I haven't watched the news in years. Neither my parents, because it's just because it's just propaganda. Like you just can't stomach it. There's actual stories going on about this and that, and instead they want to focus on past presidents or who knows what else in order to divert stories away from things that, in my opinion and in your opinion, I think actually matter. So you stop buying their paper, you stop buying their news, their channel, and it sends them a signal. I just talked about profit. Now, again, CBC's a funny one because they're already funded by government. And so to them, it just means a subsidy, and they continue to get subsidized. But it's all the more reason then to become independent, because that's nonsense, right? It doesn't hold them accountable, and they're not holding government accountable. So you defund the CBC, and you stop buying the papers and the news channels of media that is not factual and that is blatantly and knowingly lying, right? You stop doing that. And, we've seen the rise of alternative media. It's only getting bigger, right? Niche, channels that used to be niche are no longer niche, right? Whether Rebel, Western Standard in America, like Daily Wire, The Blaze, Crowder's Show, et cetera, whatever you want to use, right? Alternative media is clearly gaining some serious momentum, right? Even like Rogan and stuff, these podcasts, right? That's becoming so much bigger than it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, because people just don't trust the news for news anymore. So defund CBC, stop buying the news articles. And then the third point is perhaps the most important point. And that is, once you do all of those things, once you have independence and you have an independent media, or at least government and media are separate, right? Once you have that happen, once you stop buying papers and stuff, you have to remain vigilant, right? The last point is you cannot become apathetic. We tend to think that if you leave something alone, it stays the way it is, but it doesn't. If you leave something alone, it changes. If you leave a piece of food out on the counter, it begins to mold. It changes. Instead, you have to be consistently refurbishing that thing, right? Consistently changing it in order to keep it the same. So once you have a system where government and media are separate, you can't just leave it alone. Because if you leave it alone, it takes all of, 5 minutes for the media to go back to government and say, let's work together, or for their government to go to media and say, let's work together, right? So instead, as a citizen and as a group of citizens, we have to be continually vigilant, like watchmen, to never allow the media and government to become one entity again, or at least these siblings. That's how you might describe it, as an entity of siblings, right? Because otherwise it again becomes partial. That's a difficult thing to do, though. It's easy to become apathetic, and it's easy to enjoy, for example, the sun of summer and just leave the issues on the table and they'll figure themselves out. They won't. You have to, and I have to, and we have to as individuals consistently watch and scrutinize so carefully everything that government does in order to ensure that rights and freedoms and free press is protected, right? And if you don't do that, then you'll have a whole issue. Just the cycle will repeat once again. So that's what you have to do. That's what you have to do, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think, segues nicely into our closing remarks once again. And, if you want to help be part of this new journey that we are trying to venture on for Alberta, I encourage you to check out our website. You can go to albertaprosperityproject.com. It's there that you can see everything that we're talking about and even more, and see exactly what we are proposing. And further to that, I know that the last episode we did get quite a few emails reached out to us. That was so great to see. We got some listeners from Florida. Shout out to you there, Matt, and Brady, who is now going to the UFC as well. Congratulations on that. And just the people that are reaching out, it's been great. So if you do want to reach out to the show, I encourage you to email contact@albertaprosperity.com. Just make sure you do put podcast into the headline there. That way they know to forward it to us. It's great to always hear from our listeners. So if you want to get involved, be sure to become a member. Head over to our site to do that, and follow us on all our social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and be sure to subscribe as well so you never miss a future podcast. With that said, though, wishing our farmers well. Hopefully, I won't have any big stories about a big bill that I've got to pay the farmers in Saskatchewan. So everyone have a great long weekend. Be sure to enjoy some time with family and friends, whatever that looks like, and we will see everybody next week.